The moment I realized my grandson was freezing outside on Thanksgiving Day was the moment I understood our family had already been broken long before I arrived. I'm an old man now, living alone in a quiet house that still carries the echo of my wife's laughter. Since she passed away, I've learned that silence can be heavier than noise. To keep my hands busy and my mind steady, I repair old mechanical tools in my garage for neighbors who cannot afford new ones. It is honest work, slow work, the kind that gives you time to think. Too much time sometimes, especially on holidays. That morning, while I was drinking coffee and staring at the frost creeping along my kitchen window, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a short message from a neighbor who rarely texted me at all. He mentioned police cars near another family in the area and wrote that it made him think of me and my worries about my own family. The words were casual, almost careless, but something about them made my chest tighten. I reread the message 3 times, trying to understand why it unsettled me so deeply. My daughter had married again 3 years earlier, and ever since, my grandson had seemed to fade into the background during our conversations. He spoke less, laughed less. Whenever I asked how things were at home, I received polite answers that felt rehearsed. I told myself it was normal teenage distance. I told myself not to interfere. My late wife had always believed that families healed best when given space. I wanted to believe that too. But that morning, space felt like neglect. I looked at the clock and realized Thanksgiving dinner at my daughter's house would already be underway by the time I arrived. I had not been invited this year. There was an excuse about limited space and stress, but it hurt more than I admitted to anyone. Still, I decided to go. Not to eat, not to argue, just to see for myself that my grandson was safe and well. The weather had turned ugly fast. Snow fell thick and wet, blurring the road ahead and muffling the world into something unreal. As I drove, memories surfaced uninvited. My wife insisting that family meant showing up even when it was uncomfortable. My grandson at 12 years old, laughing too loud, asking too many questions, full of light. I wondered when that light had dimmed and why I had allowed myself not to notice. The radio droned on with holiday music that felt painfully out of place. I turned it off and drove in silence, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Every mile felt heavier, as if my body already knew what my mind refused to imagine. When I reached my daughter's neighborhood, the houses glowed warmly against the snow. Curtains drawn, lights soft and golden, shadows moving behind windows. This was what Thanksgiving was supposed to look like. Togetherness, safety. I told myself I was overreacting, that I would knock, exchange awkward greetings, maybe share pie, then leave feeling foolish for worrying. I parked at the end of the driveway and let the engine idle. I could hear faint laughter through the walls of the house, the muffled sound of voices layered over clinking dishes. The front porch light was on, illuminating falling snowflakes like sparks in the air. Everything appeared perfect. Then I saw a movement near the steps. At first, I thought it was a shadow or a decoration shifting in the wind. Then I saw the shape straighten slightly, curl inward, tremble. A figure sat hunched on the front steps, arms wrapped tightly around knees, head lowered as if trying to disappear. My heart dropped into my stomach. I stepped out of the car, the cold biting instantly through my coat. The closer I got, the clearer it became. It was my grandson. No jacket, no gloves, just thin clothes meant for indoors. His shoulders shook violently, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, something learned. For a moment I could not move. The world narrowed to the sound of my own breathing, and the realization that whatever I thought I knew about my family was wrong. I had arrived too late to prevent what had already been done. But I was not too late to stop what was coming next. I crossed the driveway faster than my age should have allowed, slipping once on the thin layer of ice, but catching myself before I fell. The cold was sharp, cruel, the kind that cuts through bone and settles deep in your chest. I could not imagine sitting still in it, not for minutes, let alone hours. When I reached him, I saw his lips first. They were blue. Not pink from cold air, but blue in a way that made fear bloom fast and ugly in my throat. I said his name, softly at first, then louder. He lifted his head slowly, as if even that small movement cost him something. His eyes widened when he recognized me. There was relief there, yes, but also panic. The kind of panic that does not belong in a child's eyes. "Grandpa," he whispered. His teeth chattered so hard that the word broke apart before it reached me. I did not ask questions. I pulled off my coat and wrapped it around him, feeling how light he was, how stiff his body had become. The cold clung to him like a second skin. When my hands touched his arms, he flinched, not from the temperature, but from instinct. That flinch told me more than any words could. "How long have you been out here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shook his head weakly. "Please don't," he said. "If they hear you." They. The word landed heavy between us. I followed his gaze to the front door. Warm light spilled out through the glass panes. I could hear laughter now, clearly. Someone said something jokingly, and another voice laughed too loud in response. The sound made my stomach turn. I helped him to his feet. His legs wobbled, nearly giving out beneath him. He grabbed onto my arm, fingers numb and clumsy. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might collapse right there on the porch. "That's it," I said. "We're getting you warm. Now." He tried to pull back. "No, I'm not allowed." The words were quiet, automatic, as if he had practiced them. "Not allowed by who?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He did not respond. He did not need to. I guided him toward my car, opened the passenger door, and helped him inside. The heater blasted warm air almost immediately. I wrapped an old blanket around his shoulders and turned the temperature higher, then higher still. Only when I saw a bit of color begin to creep back into his face did I allow myself to breathe. He sat rigid in the seat, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the house, as if expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment. His hands trembled uncontrollably. I took them gently in mine, rubbing warmth back into fingers that felt like ice. "You're safe right now," I said. "No one is going to hurt you." He nodded, but I could tell he did not believe me. Not fully. I checked the time. The afternoon was already fading, the light outside turning dull and gray. "When did you come outside?" I asked. His answer came after a long pause. "Late morning." My chest tightened. That meant hours. Hours in weather that could kill a grown man, let alone someone his size. "Why?" I asked. "What happened?" His eyes filled, but no tears fell. He had learned, somewhere along the way, that crying only made things worse. "I made a mistake," he said. "I burned something." Burned something. The way he said it, you would have thought he had committed a crime. I looked back at the house again. Steam rose from the chimney, plates clinked inside. Whatever had been burned had clearly been replaced. The punishment remained. I reached for the door handle, anger surging like heat under my skin. But he grabbed my sleeve with sudden strength. "Please," he said. "If you go in there angry, it'll be worse later. It always is." That was when I understood this was not an isolated incident. This was a system. Rules enforced by fear. Silence maintained by threat. I sat back in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel as I forced myself to slow down. Rushing in blind would not help him. I needed to know everything. "Listen to me," I said quietly. "I need you to tell me the truth. Has this happened before?" He stared down at the blanket, fingers twisting in the fabric. For a long moment, I thought he might lie. Then his shoulders sagged, as if the effort of holding it all in had finally become too much. "Yes," he said, barely audible. "A lot." The word echoed in the small space between us. As snow continued to fall around the car, I realized something chilling. The danger was not just the cold outside. The real danger was the house behind us, and whatever rules lived inside it. He did not look at me when he spoke. His eyes stayed fixed on the blanket, tracing invisible lines as if they could carry him somewhere else. "It didn't start like this," he said. "At first it was just rules." I said nothing. I let the silence give him room. "When my mom remarried, he said he wanted structure. Said boys my age needed discipline or they'd turn out useless. At the beginning it was small things, redoing chores, standing still while he explained what I did wrong. Long explanations." He swallowed. "Hours sometimes." I felt my jaw tighten, but I stayed quiet. Then the rules kept changing. One week, shoes had to be lined up a certain way. The next week, that way was wrong. If I asked questions, he said I was being disrespectful. He paused. So I stopped asking. The heater hummed softly. Outside, snow coated the windshield, sealing us off from the world. Inside the car, his voice carried the weight of years. "When did it become punishment like this?" I asked. He hesitated, then answered. "About a year in." He told me about being locked in the garage overnight for forgetting to take out the trash. About being made to stand barefoot on cold concrete until his legs went numb. About meals taken away and replaced with lectures about gratitude. Each story landed heavier than the last, not because of what was done, but because of how normal it sounded when he said it. Like this was simply the way life worked. "And your mother?" I asked quietly. His fingers tightened around the blanket. She knew some of it. She always knew something. But he'd tell her I was exaggerating, that I was trying to manipulate her. He said if she took my side, I'd never learn. And she... His voice broke. She didn't want to lose the house. The words cut deep. Fear dressed up as practicality. Silence disguised as protection. I thought of every phone call where she brushed off my concerns, every time I chose not to push. Guilt settled in my chest like a stone. "There's more," he said suddenly, as if afraid I might interrupt. "Something I haven't told anyone." I turned fully toward him. "What is it?" He reached into the pocket of his jeans and hesitated, fingers trembling. Then he pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked, the case worn thin. "I started recording," he said. "Not everything, just when I thought things might get bad." My heart skipped. Recording what? His voice, the punishments, the things he says when my mom isn't around. He looked up at me for the first time, eyes full of fear. I didn't plan to use them. I just wanted proof, in case one day I needed someone to believe me. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the weather. "Does he know?" I asked. He shook his head quickly. No. If he did, it would be over. He checks my phone sometimes, but he doesn't know how to look for hidden files. I learned how to hide them online at school. The realization hit me hard. This child had been planning for survival, not rebellion. Survival. Why didn't you send them to me? I asked. He laughed weakly. Because what if he found out? What if it just made things worse? He always said no one would help me, that if I talked, I'd lose everything. I reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. He stiffened for a moment, then relaxed, as if reminding himself that not every touch meant danger. You should never have had to live like this, I said. None of this is your fault. He nodded, but again I could tell the belief had not fully settled in. I glanced at the house once more. From this distance it looked peaceful, safe, a lie wrapped in holiday lights. Listen carefully, I said. What you showed me changes everything, but it also means we need to be smart. If we go in there unprepared, he'll deny it all. He'll make you look unstable. His breath quickened. So what do we do? I took a deep breath. The answer was already forming, heavy but clear. We confront them, I said, but not just with anger, with truth. And if they don't listen, then we involve people who will. His eyes widened. Police? Maybe, I said honestly. But first, we give them a chance to show who they really are, out loud, in front of witnesses. He looked down again. He'll say I deserved it. Then let him, I said, because this time he won't be saying it in the dark. For the first time since I arrived, I saw something shift in my grandson's expression. Not hope exactly, something harder, something steadier. What if my mom chooses him again? He asked. The question hurt more than any accusation. I answered truthfully. Then she'll have to live with that choice. But you won't have to live with the consequences anymore. Outside, the snow fell thicker, quieter. Inside the car, a decision had already been made. Whatever waited behind that front door, I was done pretending it wasn't there. I told him to stay close to me, then opened the car door and stepped back into the cold. The air felt sharper now, as if it sensed what was coming. My boots crunched against the snow as I walked toward the house, every step heavy with purpose. I did not knock. Knocking implied respect, and respect had already been forfeited. I kicked the door once, hard, right beside the lock. The sound of splintering wood cut through the laughter inside like a gunshot. The door flew open. Warm air rushed out, carrying the smell of roasted meat, gravy, and something sweet baking in the oven. The contrast was obscene. Heat and abundance spilling into the cold, where my grandson had been left to freeze. Inside, the scene froze. A long dining table sat under bright lights, plates full, glasses half raised. A holiday centerpiece sat proudly in the middle like a cruel joke. My daughter stood at one end of the table, her face draining of color as soon as she saw me. Her husband stood at the other end, tall, composed, carving knife still in his hand. No one spoke at first. I stepped inside, snow melting off my coat onto their polished floor. My grandson followed hesitantly, still wrapped in my jacket, his body tense like a trapped animal brought into open space. "What is going on here?" I said, my voice echoing louder than I expected. My daughter found her voice first. "Dad, you cannot just break into our house like this." I pointed back toward the open doorway. Your son was sitting outside that door for hours in freezing weather. Her eyes flicked to him, then away. He was being disciplined. The word hit me like a slap. I turned my attention to her husband. He set the knife down carefully, wiped his hands on a cloth, and smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. "This is a family matter," he said calmly. "You're overstepping." "Family," I repeated. "Then explain why he was locked out like an animal." "He made a serious mistake," the man replied evenly. "Ruined an important meal. I was teaching him consequences." I felt my hands clench. "You taught him hypothermia." My daughter shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, please, you're making a scene." I laughed once, sharp and bitter. "A scene? You left your child to freeze while you ate dinner." Her husband stepped closer, placing himself slightly in front of her. It was subtle, practiced. A man used to controlling space. "He is not a child," he said. "He is old enough to learn responsibility, and this is my house." I looked him straight in the eyes. "Then start by explaining why he was begging me not to speak because he was afraid of you." Silence fell heavy over the room. For a brief second, something flickered across my daughter's face. Fear, shame, recognition. Then it vanished. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "You don't live here." "No," I said, "but I see clearly." Her husband exhaled slowly as if humoring a stubborn old man. "Let me be very clear," he said. "I provide this home. I set the rules, and I will discipline anyone under this roof as I see fit." "Anyone," I repeated. "Or just him?" He did not answer immediately. Then he shrugged. "He is not my blood," he said flatly. "I married his mother, not him. I tolerated him. That should count for something." The room went dead silent. My grandson inhaled sharply behind me. I felt something inside my chest crack open and harden at the same time. There it was. The truth, finally spoken without disguise. Not discipline, not concern. Ownership without obligation. I turned to my daughter. "You heard that." She stared at the table. "He didn't mean it like that." "He meant it exactly like that," I said. Her husband crossed his arms. "If the boy cannot respect my authority, he does not belong here." I nodded slowly. "Then you're right about one thing." He raised an eyebrow, smug. "Finally. He doesn't belong here." I turned to my grandson and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Go get your things." The room erupted. "You are not taking him," her husband snapped. "I will call the police." "Do it," I said, "and explain to them why you locked someone outside in freezing weather as punishment." My daughter's voice broke. "Dad, please, don't do this." I met her eyes. "You already did." My grandson hesitated, torn, then nodded and moved toward the stairs. I stayed between him and the man until he disappeared from view. Her husband stepped toward me, lowering his voice. "You think you're saving him. You're just destroying this family." "No," I said calmly. "I'm ending the lie." From upstairs came the sound of drawers opening, footsteps moving fast. My daughter stood shaking, hands pressed to her mouth, while the perfect holiday table sat untouched, cooling, forgotten. Behind me, cold air still poured through the broken doorway, and for the first time that day, it felt like the house was finally exposed. The upstairs footsteps were quick and uneven, drawers opening and slamming shut like nervous breaths. I stood my ground at the bottom of the stairs, back straight, eyes forward, listening for any movement behind me. The man hovered near the dining table, jaw clenched, hands flexing as if deciding whether intimidation would still work. My daughter remained frozen in place. She did not follow her son. She did not stop him either. Minutes stretched thin. When my grandson came back down, he carried a worn duffel bag slung over one shoulder. It looked far too light for someone who had lived there for years. That alone told me how little of that house had ever been his. "Is that all?" I asked. He nodded. "The rest doesn't matter." Her husband laughed quietly. "Don't come crawling back when you realize how easy life was here." My grandson did not respond. He walked straight to the door, past the table, past his mother, who whispered his name but made no move to stop him. I followed, one hand still on his shoulder, the other reaching for the doorframe to steady myself as we stepped back into the cold. The door hung crooked where I had kicked it in. Snow drifted through the gap, settling onto the clean floor like quiet accusation. We crossed the driveway in silence. I loaded his bag into the back of my vehicle and helped him into the passenger seat. As I shut the door, I saw the man standing in the doorway, phone already pressed to his ear. I knew exactly who he was calling. I pulled away slowly, tires crunching over ice, heart pounding hard enough to drown out the sound of the engine. We had not gone far when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I did not need to look to know what was coming. "I'm scared," my grandson said quietly. "He's going to say you kidnapped me." "He can say whatever he wants," I replied. "Truth doesn't disappear just because someone lies louder." We drove to my house without speaking. The familiar shape of my porch light cutting through the dark felt like a lifeline. Inside, warmth wrapped around us instantly. I handed him a blanket, told him to sit, told him to breathe. We had barely taken off our coats when headlights swept across the living room wall. Then came the knock. Not a polite knock, not a neighborly one. It was firm, authoritative, final. I told him to stay behind me as I opened the door. Two officers stood on the porch, their expressions neutral, practiced. Behind them, just far enough back to watch without stepping into the light, stood my daughter and her husband. His arms were crossed. His face wore a look of triumph. "Sir," one officer said, "we've received a report of a possible kidnapping." I nodded once. I expected that. Her husband stepped forward. "That man broke into my house and took my stepson against his will." The officer turned to me. "Is there a young man here?" "Yes," I said, "and he came with me voluntarily." Before anyone could stop him, my grandson stepped into view. The blanket slipped slightly from his shoulders, revealing hands still red from the cold. "I'm here because I want to be," he said. His voice shook, but it did not break. Her husband scoffed. "He's confused. He's been manipulated." The officer looked at my grandson. "Is that true?" He shook his head slowly. "No. I left because I was afraid to stay." Silence settled heavily on the porch. My daughter stared at the ground. Her husband's jaw tightened. The officer glanced between us. "We're going to need to talk inside." As they stepped over my threshold, I understood something clearly for the first time that night. This was no longer about a family argument or a holiday gone wrong. This was about truth standing up in a place where it had been forced to stay quiet for too long. And whatever happened next, there was no turning back. The living room felt smaller with the officers inside, the walls closing in as if the truth itself needed space to breathe. One officer stood near the door while the other took notes, his pen moving slowly, deliberately. My daughter hovered near the window, arms wrapped around herself. Her husband remained standing, too calm, too confident, like a man who believed control was something he could reclaim with the right tone of voice. "Let us start from the beginning," the officer said. "Why did the young man leave the house today?" Her husband answered before anyone else could. "He disrespected me, ruined an important meal. I gave him a consequence. He ran away when he did not like it." I watched my grandson stiffen, his hands clenched into fists inside the blanket. I spoke calmly. He was locked outside in freezing weather for hours. "That is an exaggeration," the man said smoothly. "Teenagers exaggerate." The officer turned to my grandson. "Is that true?" My grandson swallowed. His eyes flicked briefly to his mother, then back to the floor. I could see the old fear trying to pull him back into silence. Then he reached into his pocket. "I have recordings," he said quietly. The room shifted. Her husband's head snapped up. "What did you say?" "I have recordings," my grandson repeated, louder this time. "Of the punishments, of what he says when he thinks no one will hear." My daughter gasped softly. "You recorded us?" "Not you," he said, finally looking at her. "Him, because no one believed me." The officer raised his eyebrows slightly. "Do you still have those recordings?" My grandson nodded and unlocked his phone with shaking fingers. He hesitated, then pressed play. The voice that filled the room did not sound like a concerned parent. It was cold, controlled, sharp with contempt. Words about worthlessness, about being a burden, about learning pain as respect. The sound was clear enough that no one could pretend otherwise. My daughter covered her mouth. Tears streamed down her face as the voice continued, unmistakable, undeniable. Her husband lunged forward. "That was taken out of context." "Sit down," the officer said firmly. The recording ended. Silence followed, thick and heavy. The officer turned to my daughter. "Ma'am, is this your husband's voice?" She nodded slowly. "Yes." "And did you know your son was being punished this way?" Her shoulders collapsed inward. "Yes," she whispered. "I knew." Her husband stared at her in disbelief. "What are you doing?" She looked up at him, and something in her eyes had changed. "I am telling the truth." She took a breath that sounded like it had been held for years. "He locked him out today. He has done it before. He said it would make him strong. He said if I interfered, I would regret it." The officer closed his notebook. "Sir, do you have anything to add?" Her husband stepped back, shaking his head. "This is ridiculous. You are going to ruin my life over a boy who cannot follow rules." The officer moved closer to him. "What ruins lives is endangerment and repeated abuse." Her husband turned toward the door, panic flashing for the first time. "I am leaving." "You are not," the officer said, placing a hand on his arm. As the handcuffs clicked shut, my daughter broke down completely. She slid into a chair, sobbing with a sound that came from somewhere deep and broken. My grandson stood frozen, watching the man who had terrified him for years finally lose control. "It is over," I said softly, though my voice trembled. "He cannot hurt you anymore." The officer led the man toward the door. Before stepping outside, he twisted around, eyes burning. "You think this ends here," he spat. "You will all regret this." The door closed behind him. The house fell quiet. My daughter looked at her son through tears. "I am so sorry," she said. "I should have protected you." He hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged her, careful, uncertain. I just wanted you to believe me." Outside, the sound of the police car faded into the distance. Inside, something fragile but real began to form. Not forgiveness yet, not healing, but truth. And after years of fear, truth felt like the strongest thing any of us had ever held. The days that followed moved strangely, as if time itself had slowed to allow us to catch our breath. After the officers left, my house felt quieter than it ever had, not empty, but stripped down to something honest. My grandson slept for nearly 12 hours that first night, curled under blankets on the couch, his body finally letting go of the vigilance it had carried for years. I sat nearby in a chair, afraid to leave the room, afraid that if I did, something would pull him back into that life.
My daughter stayed too. She did not ask where she would sleep or how long she could remain. She simply sat at the kitchen table until morning, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. When the sun came up, she looked older, but also clearer, like a fog had finally lifted and revealed the damage beneath it. The legal process began quickly. Statements were taken, recordings were copied. A protective order was issued before the end of the week. The man who had ruled that house with quiet cruelty was no longer allowed near my grandson. When the news came, my grandson did not celebrate. He nodded once and went back to his room, as if part of him was still waiting for the punishment to follow. Healing did not arrive all at once. It came in small, almost invisible steps. The first time he ate without watching the clock. The first time he left a glass on the counter and did not flinch. The first time he laughed out loud at something on television and then stopped abruptly, checking the room to make sure it was allowed. Each moment told me how deep the damage ran. My daughter began to change too. She cried often at first, overwhelmed by guilt and the weight of what she had allowed. But slowly, something else appeared beneath the tears. Anger. Not the loud kind, but a steady, focused anger directed at herself and the choices she had made. She started therapy within weeks. She found part-time work. She stopped defending what could not be defended. One night, as we washed dishes together, she finally said it out loud. "I was afraid," she said. "Afraid of starting over. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of admitting I was wrong." I nodded. Fear keeps a lot of people quiet. She looked at me then, eyes red but steady. "I will never be quiet again." My grandson began therapy as well. At first, he spoke little, answering questions with shrugs and half-sentences. But his counselor told me that silence was common, that safety had to come before words. Slowly, the words did come. He talked about rules that changed without warning, about learning to disappear, about believing that love was something you earned by suffering. The hardest moment came one evening when he asked me, quietly, "Do you think I deserved any of it?" I put my paper down and looked at him fully. "No," I said. "Not a single second." He nodded, absorbing the answer like medicine, something he needed to take more than once before it could work. Months passed. Winter softened into spring. The house filled with small routines that rebuilt trust, shared meals, quiet conversations, ordinary days that did not end in fear. My grandson applied to school, unsure of himself, bracing for rejection out of habit. When the acceptance letter came, he stared at it for a long time before smiling, as if joy itself was something unfamiliar. My daughter stood behind him, hands on his shoulders, crying again, but this time from relief. The legal consequences followed their course. The man was sentenced, counseling was mandated. The control he once wielded so easily was gone. When I heard the final outcome, I felt no triumph, only a calm certainty that the truth had done what it was meant to do. One evening, as the three of us sat together after dinner, my grandson looked around the room and said something that stayed with me. "This feels quiet," he said, "but not the scary kind." I understood exactly what he meant. Quiet no longer meant waiting for harm. It meant safety. And for the first time in years, that was enough.
The next Thanksgiving arrived without ceremony. No grand table, no forced smiles. Just the three of us in my modest kitchen, sunlight cutting softly across the counter, as my daughter stirred a pot on the stove, and my grandson set plates without being asked. The simplicity felt intentional, almost sacred. This was not a holiday about pretending anymore. It was about survival, and about what comes after. My grandson had grown taller in ways that had nothing to do with height. He moved differently now, less cautious, less apologetic. He had learned how to exist without asking permission for every breath. Therapy had helped, but what helped most was consistency. Warm meals, doors that were never locked against him, voices that did not rise in anger without warning. A letter sat folded beside his plate. He had read it so many times the edges were soft. "I still can't believe they said yes," he said quietly. "They did not just say yes," I replied. "They recognized what you earned." He had been accepted into a demanding academic program with full financial support. Not because of sympathy, because of merit, because of resilience forged under pressure no one should ever have to endure. When he talked about his future now, there was no fear in his voice, only purpose. My daughter watched him carefully, as if memorizing every moment she had almost lost. She had rebuilt her life piece by piece. New work, new boundaries, a home where no one had to earn safety. She carried regret with her, but she no longer let it define her. She had learned that love without courage is fragile, and that silence can wound as deeply as cruelty. Later that evening, after the dishes were done and the house settled into a calm hush, my grandson sat across from me and said something I did not expect. "I want to help kids like me," he said. "Not just survive. I want them to know sooner than I did that what happens at home is not always their fault." I felt pride rise in my chest, sharp and steady. Pain had not hardened him. It had clarified him. Outside, the air was cold, but not hostile. The porch light glowed softly against the dark, and for a moment I thought about that other Thanksgiving, the one that began in warmth and ended in truth, the one that shattered a family illusion and replaced it with something real. I used to believe that family meant endurance, that staying quiet kept the peace, that love was proven by how much you were willing to tolerate. I was wrong. Family is not the people who sit at the table while you suffer outside. Family is the one who opens the door. Family is the voice that says, "This stops now." Family is action. Looking back, I understand this clearly. Abuse does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it arrives dressed as discipline. Sometimes it hides behind tradition and authority. Sometimes it survives because good people are afraid of what will happen if they speak. I was afraid too. Afraid of conflict. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of losing what little family I thought I had left. But the truth is this: confronting abuse is not betrayal. It is responsibility.
And love without action is not love at all. If I had arrived an hour later that day, the ending might have been very different. That knowledge stays with me. It always will. But so does the sound of my grandson laughing freely in a house where he no longer has to disappear to stay safe. That is the ending that matters.